This podcast is for entertainment and storytelling purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice. Some topics may be sensitive. Please listen with care and seek support if needed.
Hi, I'm Crystal Park. Welcome to Season 2 of the Because She's Adopted podcast. Hello and welcome. Today we have a very special guest, Patrece Maluzinski. She's a friend of mine. We met about a year ago on another project. Thank you so much for being here. And why don't we just start at the beginning, and you can just share a little bit about being an adoptee, what you, maybe what that was like in early years for you. Have you always known you were adopted? All the questions that us adoptees get asked without the obnoxious responses. Right. I won't give you any of those obnoxious responses.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Well, I was born in Edmonton, Alberta in the early 70s to a very young couple. My parents were high school sweethearts. So my birth mother was just 16 when I was born and my birth father 18. And for the first, 5 months of her pregnancy, my birth mother didn't tell anyone she was pregnant. And she was very tiny, and she was able to conceal her pregnancy for that long until she wasn't. And it just so happened that my paternal grandfather, so my dad's dad, my birth father's dad, was a minister. He was a Christian minister, and he had seen this before. Teenage pregnancies. And so they worked up the courage to go to him. My parents worked up the courage to go to him. And he immediately said, okay, well, I know what we're going to do. You're not going to keep this baby. This baby is going to go to parents who can provide for it. And so my grandfather, then they called my mother's parents into the deal, and the four of them sat in the minister's church basement, I think it was, and worked out this whole thing. And it must have been terrifying for my birth mother and for my birth father. I'm sure it was hard for him too. My grandfather brokered the whole deal. He said this will be a government closed adoption, and birth mother will go to a home for unwed mothers for the last trimester of her pregnancy, which she did. And so she lived in a home with other women at that time. And I think that was quite a common thing in my era. That was, we often hear in Canada about the baby scoop, right? And we associate that with Indigenous people, of course. Yeah. And what people don't understand is that there was sort of a larger baby scoop going on, It started really after the Second World War and continued till the early 80s in Canada. It didn't continue quite as long in the States, but just sort of a baby scoop era is what they call it. And so I was really part of that. And, my adoptive parents, who I'll just call mom and dad, were very, very pleased to have a girl. It was the third child that they adopted. I should back up and say that I spent a week in the hospital because they kept mums and babies a lot longer back then than they do now. And I spent a week in the hospital and then another 4 weeks in foster care. So I really wasn't taken home by my adoptive parents until I was 5 weeks, almost 5 weeks of age. So, who knows what goes on in that time.
Right.
So I was born on an Easter Sunday, and my adoptive mom, my mom often joked when I was growing up. I've always known that I was adopted. I mean, I think by the time I was 4 or maybe 5 at the latest, when I was old enough to sort of understand the concept, my parents told me. And I was their third adopted child. I have 2 older brothers, just like you do.
Yes.
And they're quite a bit older than me. My eldest brother is 10 years older than me, and my second brother is 6 years older than me. And so I was the only girl, and I was the youngest, and my dad used to call me the princess. I was pretty spoiled. I I had lovely parents. I certainly can't complain about the family that I was placed in.
I feel like we have a lot in common.
We do have a lot in common. I know your story too, and we do have a few things in common for sure. I can't say that the biggest sign that I knew that something was wrong or that I was different somehow was that I had this tremendous anxiety all the time. I should tell you first. I forgot about this, but since I was born on an Easter Sunday, my mother first told me that I was brought by the Easter Bunny and left on their front doorstep, which is, one of those stories that, funny, not funny, right?
Yeah.
To an adoptee.
Yeah.
But I knew that was garbage. Even as a 4 or 5-year-old, I knew that wasn't the truth.
Yeah.
But my mom loved to tell that story, and anyone who sort of asked or, she would tell it at many opportunities. I heard it many times, and it started to get a little bit old and irritating because I knew that wasn't my real birth story.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of us adoptees, there's this theme that our stories are told for us for so many years. And my mom had the same types of stories too, that she would just tell over and over and over again and kind of laugh about. And looking back at it now, it's like, that wasn't funny. And it was, I don't know, this may sound harsh, but I feel like it's part of this whole like adoption indoctrination, that they just tell our stories for us so that they can direct us on how to feel about them or how we should feel, because they want us to have a positive outlook on being adopted, right? Mm-hmm. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. And it's interesting that you say that because, my 16-year-old birth mom, after she gave birth, when she left the hospital, maybe 5 days later, she was told to forget about it. Like, I don't know how any young person or any woman could forget about giving birth. That to me is an impossible thing to do. And, in the early 70s, there was no counseling available for women who surrendered babies, or relinquished babies. So I know that affected her very much. And the reason I bring that up is because I was kind of told to forget about it too, and just to be grateful, that I was in a good home, and no doubt I was. As I said, no complaints. I had a really good family. My parents weren't perfect, but I do, as trite as this might sound, I think that they did the very best with what they knew at the time. But I'm really super relieved that the narrative is changing around adoption.
Yes,
and that it is now being recognized as a trauma. And that it is not done with so much secrecy anymore. I think that, I don't know about you, Crystal, but I really wasn't allowed to talk about it so much, or at least that was my perception. I didn't feel comfortable asking too many questions. I remember once being about 9 or 10 years old and asking my mother, I remember where I was like sitting in the family kitchen, and I asked my mother, I said, "Do you know what my name was when I was born? Was I given a name?" And she thought about it, and she told me my name, and I sort of sat with that for a second, and then my mother said, "That wouldn't have been a very good name for you," and she sort of shortened it and said it would have, I think Patrece is a much nicer name. So whether my parents knew it or not, they kind of vilified my biological parents without knowing anything about them, other than the fact that they were teenagers and probably too young or not ready to raise a baby.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you go to the anxiety piece for me
Sure
at a
can.
young age? Because I relate to that deeply. I was an incredibly anxious child. I bit my fingers down to absolutely nothing. I didn't realize that I had anxiety until the first time I had a drink and didn't feel the anxiety anymore. And I thought, oh my gosh, is this how people function in life? Like without feeling impending doom constantly?
Yeah, that's the term I used too. I always had a sense of impending doom, whether it was going to school on a regular day, whether it was going to the dentist, whether it was like high stakes or not high stakes.
Yeah.
I had anxiety before everything I did. My earliest memory of anxiety, and I write about this in my book, my mother had taken me grocery shopping. It was like a sunny summer morning, and we had gone to our local Safeway. And when we got back to the car, and I think I was 4 at the very most, Crystal. I was really young. And when we got back to the car, my mother discovered she had locked her keys in the car. And so, of course, there were no cell phones back then. And so she said to me, like, we had this cart full of groceries, paper bags filled to the brim. And she said, "You wait here, stay put. I'm going to run into the Safeway and call Dad to bring us an extra key." And so my mother left, and I went into full panic mode. I started crying and whimpering, and I proceeded to throw up all over the parking lot. And then a crowd of, Safeway shoppers came and huddled around me and tried to find out what was going wrong with this little toddler who had been left by herself. Wow. And, I think my mother panicked too. Now, why she didn't take me back into the Safeway with her, I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe that wasn't the best decision to leave a toddler unaccompanied. However, that's the kind of anxiety. I panicked so much that maybe that mother wouldn't come back. And, somewhere in my nervous system, my little nervous system knew that I had already lost something very important, something really vital. And I had that fear of losing another important person that I had bonded with and that I loved very much.
Yeah.
So that was a very real thing for me at the time.
That must have been so hard for you as a small child to think back on that even now. Like the moment you said that your mom told you to wait there, I started to panic as you were even telling the story, because things like that, I relate. They would send me into panic. I didn't throw up, but I feel like my anxiety was so internalized, I didn't express it in any way until I was a little bit older, and then it came out more in like anger and rage. But as you were talking, I had a memory pop up that I haven't had in many, many years. So thank you for that. That I didn't like going out very much. I was a homebody. I still am. And I can remember my mom being like, "Well, we got to go to the grocery store. You got to come with me," because she couldn't leave me home alone. And I'd be like, "No, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go." And then she'd be like, "Okay, I'm leaving. Bye." And I can remember being a little small child and running as fast as I could for my shoes, grabbing them and running as fast as I could out the door. Like she knew that was going to work on me. But I wonder if she knew how much anxiety that caused me if she would do it the same way,
Probably
today.
not.
Probably not. Yeah. So how did the anxiety progress as you got older, and how did it sort of manifest itself in your life?
Right. Well, I remember in my early school years, like play school, my mother tried taking me to play school one time, and that was the end of play school because I didn't want to interact with the other kids. I saw them, running around and having fun, and I didn't want any part of it. I wanted to be home with my mom. And so that was my first and last day of play school. I just, I was in tears by the time my mom came to pick me up, and it was like all of 2 or 3 hours. So I wasn't, a lot of babies aren't good with strangers, but I really wasn't good with strangers. So I did settle into, kindergarten and the early grades. And I think that I was a pretty precocious young little thing. I had 2 much older brothers, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted to grow up very fast. I wanted to do everything that they did, And so I think I was a pretty smart little girl. I did well in school, and I remember having successes. Like I was involved in dancing when I was little, and music, and I thrived for a few years there until I started grade 4. And then my mother got the idea that I ought to skip grade 4 and go to grade 5. And that was starting to fall out of favor, this, skipping a grade idea.
Yeah.
That was really falling out of favor. But my mom, insisted. She talked to the teacher. I think the teacher might have even thought it was possible or a good idea. So I was given this battery of tests as a, 8-year-old, I guess. And it was determined that I was, really good on the written part, but the oral part, I bombed. Like, I was really nervous when this child psychologist came and interviewed me. And I remember just like not being able to answer simple questions because I felt my mother's pressure. My mother was right beside me in this interview, and I didn't do terribly well. And so the next day, my mother got a phone call saying, Patrece is really smart, but we don't think it's a great idea for her to go ahead to grade 5. Why don't we just leave this for now? We can revisit it later maybe. And my mother would have none of that. So she just really insisted. I think she went to the school, she went to the highest person up that she could find and said, no, my daughter's being accelerated. So I should note that my mother was really smart in school. She skipped 2 grades when she was in grade school. And I think she wanted me to be even more successful in school than she was. Academics were everything to my mom. I don't think my dad cared as much, really, but my mom certainly cared. So anyway, I was pushed ahead to grade 5, and for a number of reasons, I started not performing as well as I had been performing previously. So, my math grades started to fall, my science grades started to fall, and not only that, but my peers at school really didn't appreciate this because I had always been in a split level class. So I think I was in a grade 4 and 5 class to begin with. And then when I was accelerated, I just had to move my desk to the other side of the room. And bingo, I was accelerated. And there was a lot of resentment from my classmates, I think. That's what I felt. And I felt like friendships ended, and I felt like I had to make new friends. It was just a very awkward thing. And, that feeling of not belonging really followed me throughout my grade school. So in junior high was a disaster for me because not only wasn't I a good student, but I was socially awkward too. I remember making friends that were just really bad for me because they were the only people that kind of wanted to be my friends, right? So my friends were all the smokers and the headbangers.
I can't picture that. You seem far too pure.
Well, I was. I was a really good girl. I think I was a really good kid, and I really, really feared my mother.
Yeah.
But I remember more often than not my mother saying that she hated my friends and that I had to make new friends, and that wasn't such an easy thing for me to do. Mm-hmm. And I as much as I loved my mother, I feared her in equal parts. I don't know what your experience was.
I completely relate to that. Oh yeah. Now reflecting back on it, I don't know if it was actually towards her or if she was the only example of a mother that I could sort of take all of that anger and resentment out on.
Yeah, it's convenient, right? Because our mothers, no matter how they treat us, really, they're close. They're probably one of the safer people in our lives, and they're convenient. They're there, right? Yeah. And so I took out some anger on my mom too, and I think I resented my mom because somewhere I didn't put it together for the longest time, but my life was sailing along quite nicely without me needing to be skipped ahead a grade. And, toward the end of my mom's life, we talked about this, and she apologized to me. Oh. And she knew that she didn't make the best decision for me. And we made peace about it, and it's all good. But I kind of wonder how my childhood would have been different, how grade school would have been different had I just been, left to do the normal course of things.
Yeah. I don't know. As an adoptee, I think there's so many expectations put on us. And it sounds to me like you were very much, there was very high expectations. You had to perform, you had to live up to a standard, you had to be perfect.
Yeah. I felt like I never measured up.
Yeah.
I was not good enough in my mom's eyes. and that's a difficult place for any kid to be in, adopted or not, to feel like you're not measuring up. You're not, so.
Should we skip ahead a little bit
Sure,
to maybe like...
Well, there is something that's kind of a turning point,
Sure,
Crystal.
yeah, I'd love to hear that.
In high school, I think, I was younger than all my peers all the time, right? Because I had skipped that grade. And I remember when I was 15, I was in grade 11 when I was 15. And the fall that grade 11 started, I was going to a private school at the time. And my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And she was given, I think, like maybe a 5% chance of living. Like it was quite advanced by the time they found the cancer. So she needed surgery, chemo, radiation, the whole bit. And I was terrified. That fear of abandonment, I was just so insecure all the time. And I remember having a really nice group of friends, supportive group of friends. They were still the smokers and the drinkers and everything. And I didn't do those things, I was really good. I really didn't do those things so much, but they were supportive. And I remember not being able to do simple things like take a shower in a reasonable amount of time because my mind would be awfulizing the future and worrying about my mom's death, and I remember being in this one class in high school. It was the morning of my mother's surgery. My parents sent me to school, or my dad sent me to school. And I remember excusing myself from class and going next door to this little chapel because it was a Christian high school. And I remember getting on my knees and just praying to God that my mom would live. And those were hard days. And, she did live, but not before having, coding a few times in the hospital and nearly dying a few times. Like she had pneumonia after her chemotherapy. She was just sick. My mom was sick a lot after that. And I kind of slipped into the caregiver position. I would be pretending to do my homework at the kitchen table, and all the while, my mom, I could see her in her bedroom she'd have her bedroom door open, and it would be, maybe 7 p.m, but my mother would go to bed early. She was in bed like a lot of the time. So I remember like looking into her bedroom, listening to see if she needed me or if I could like bring her a cold washcloth or, there was nothing much I could do as a kid, but I felt responsible for my mother's well-being. I felt responsible for her healing. And I just never lost that. I still have the caregiver. I still jump into caregiver mode whenever one of my loved ones who's elderly is on the scene. That's just the role that I play. And in itself, that's not a bad thing, but it's a bad thing for a child to have to assume. It's a really difficult role that no child should have to assume. So really, childhood, I would say, more of a miss than a hit. I can laugh about it now, but it was very painful. There were some really painful moments there.
Yeah. So how did you come through?
Well, I did what any good teenager did. I escaped as soon as possible. So when I was 18, I moved to southern Alberta to go to university, and I lived with my middle brother for a few years because he had a job there. Like he graduated from university the same time I graduated from high school. And it just kind of happened that we were able to move to Lethbridge together. And I ended up going to university there. And about a year and a half into my time at university, or I don't even know if it was that long, but I latched myself on to a guy who was an alcoholic and a heavy cannabis user. So,
this is nothing's going to go wrong.
Nothing's going to go wrong. Yeah, so I knew he was bad for me. Like I knew it, but I was so stubborn, and I was so happy to have freedom and to be away from home and to have escaped that caregiver role for a little while. So something interesting happened. When I got to university, my grades started really going up because I was studying something that I wanted to study. I was an English major and I went into education. My parents wanted me to become a teacher, which I really didn't care about teaching so much, but I knew that I loved English, and I knew that I wanted to do something to do with writing. It's always been in me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I made a lot of mischief. I got into a lot of trouble. Sorry about that. I got into a lot of trouble in university, just with this fellow, like just doing things that didn't align with my integrity or my values. And interestingly, he was an adoptee as well. What are the chances?
Way.
Yeah. He came from a family that had adopted 2 children, and he was the eldest. And so we were like these 2 lost souls. And the important part of this story, I just want to quickly say, is that while he was doing, his drinking and partying, I I had a terrible eating disorder going on. I was really, really addicted to sugar. Anything candy, refined sugar, anything that tasted sweet, I was all over that. And it was people laugh at me. Like some people just say, "Are you sugar? Are you kidding?" Like, "Ooh, you hard drug user," But it was a real problem. Like it stole my focus. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't get through writing an essay for my classes without having some kind of candy or cereal or whatever, something sweet to just numb me from, I don't know what, just from I just had this dis-ease with life. And so, I would later learn in recovery that sick people attract sick people. Yeah. And that's not to be hard on myself or anything, but it's kind of true. I think that it's easier to be stuck in addiction, and it was comfortable. It was what I knew. It was what I was doing that to protect myself because there was so much pain underneath that.
Yeah. I always say, like, it's so easy for people to look at drugs and alcohol or gambling or sex addiction as being like these, terrible addictions that destroy your life. And like, yes, they do, but any addiction can destroy your life because you're not present. You're not experiencing your feelings. Anything that you're using to escape your reality or to soothe yourself, is problematic, right? Doesn't matter what it is. So I can see how people might kind of giggle at sugar addiction, but it's a real thing, especially when you understand how the brain works in terms of addiction.
Yes, yeah. Anything that gives you a bit of a dopamine hit is going to, and we're all different. For some people it's alcohol. For me it was sugar, which is just a molecule different than alcohol.
Yeah,
so, it could have easily have been another substance, but sugar was available and it was legal. And my parents had plenty of it. My mom was a great baker and a great cook. And there was we never ran out of sugar at home.
I have a question for you about the boyfriend. 2 questions, actually. The first one is, you said that you sort of escaped the caretaker role, but do you think that you just went into a caretaker role of this boyfriend?
Oh, absolutely. Because I fell into codependency. Like, there are a lot of different definitions for codependency, right? And the one that I think I like, there are a few, but the one I like the most is it's the disease of looking away. You're focusing on somebody else. I think Nikki Myers said that.
I've never heard of that
The disease
before.
of looking away. So rather than owning the fact that I had a problem, with food, I was so busy micromanaging my husband, because he did turn into my husband. I married the guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So at 22, I had no business getting married, but I married him at 22 and he was 25. And I did a lot of, snooping in the fridge to see, because he used to keep his hard liquor in the freezer so that it would be nice and cold. And I would measure the alcohol bottles. I would, you name it. The crazy making was there.
Yeah.
And I would go out in the middle of the night to look for him when he disappeared. The codependent enabling wife. I was that person.
I married young too, and he was also
sister, right?
Like, oh my gosh, like you're explaining my early 20s. Oh my goodness.
Yes, it sounds. Yeah, I don't think there's any mistake. We have such, as adoptees, Crystal, we have such. I shouldn't speak for you, but I had such a poor sense of self.
Yes.
And I was malleable. Like I could just, change myself to fit with whoever it was. I could be the wonderful daughter with my parents and tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. And I could also be the bad girl who was, sneaking around and enabling her boyfriend and just getting into mischief.
Yeah.
There's a side of me that my family, well, I mean, they're going to know now but after they read my book too. But, I really was a lost soul. I didn't have a solid sense of self, and I certainly wasn't grounded. And then when you throw addiction in the mix, you're really not present for your own life.
I had a guest on a few episodes ago, Dr. Alana Berg, and she said something that I have not been able to get out of my head. And it speaks exactly to this whole idea of how we mold ourselves to others. She said that a child, when presented with the opportunity for attachment or authenticity, they will always choose attachment. And I think that is the epitome of the reasoning behind why we can become these chameleons, because we already have this attachment wound by being separated by our birth mothers, and we don't want that feeling of detachment. And so we betray our own authenticity over and over and over and over and over again so that we won't have that sense of loss, right? Regardless whether it's healthy attachment or not, right? If someone's thirsty enough, they're going to drink from a puddle, right? So, but yeah, that was, I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but it just blew my mind and I can't stop thinking about it.
And Alana was absolutely right. I that's been my experience, because given the chance to belong in some relationship and to be accepted in some relationship and to be loved, given that or being true to myself, I would have chosen the belonging aspect every time. That was so important to me. And it was all unconscious. I was not living a conscious life.
Completely. And isn't it funny now to look back on that girl and like with such deep compassion for her now?
Oh yeah.
Like, you sweet thing, you just want to scoop her up and be like, you get to be you. You don't have to be anybody else. But it was too scary back then.
It was just too scary. And I just didn't understand, partly because I was told this. I had never been allowed to talk about adoption. I didn't put it all together by myself, because the narrative that was circulating in society at the time was that adoption was beautiful and wonderful, and you're so lucky, Patrece, because you had such great parents growing up. And I think one of the most important things I've learned about being an adoptee in the last, certainly since I started writing my book back in, I've been working at it in fits and starts, but I started really thinking about writing a book back in 2019. And I quickly discovered that it's not a black and white issue. There are so many gray areas, and two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
We can love our birth parents, we can love our adoptive parents. I love my mom and dad deeply, and I can meet new people and love new people in my biological family. And it's such a strange thing. It's just not cut and dry.
I agree. I just want to go back quickly. My second question for you around your first husband was, did the two of you ever talk about adoption?
No.
Never
we thought it was, no, we didn't. We thought it was something cool to have in common.
Yeah.
I guess we talked about it a little bit because he had a sibling that had found her birth mother, I think it was. And I think that my first husband's parents were so upset about that.
Oh. And
so we kind of sided with them because neither of us had looked for our biological families. So we just thought it was kind of, I don't know, and I could speak for myself too. I just adopted, I just took the view that my mom and dad would have had, that it's not necessary to go looking. Everything you need, we've given to you. And so it's not necessary for you to go looking for another family that probably won't have much to offer you. That was the narrative in my house. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just taking in that statement. It doesn't sit good with me.
No. But I should say that I did learn from my first marriage. We stayed together as a married couple for 5 years. And when I saw an opportunity, I left. And it took me a couple years of dabbling and messing around after that. But then in my early 30s, I found I knew I needed help. I knew that the way that I ate and the way that I thought about sugar was making me crazy, not to mention the body image and the body dysmorphia. You know, my weight would fluctuate by as much as 20 pounds throughout my 20s. So, you know, other people must have thought, poor girl, what's she going through? And I just carried so much shame about it. And the fact that I couldn't stop my behavior with food scared me enough to finally tell my mom. Like when I moved home at age 30, I was so humbled, Crystal. I was so humbled because I had to move home with my parents back home at age 30. And yeah, I was humiliated and humbled. And I remember pulling my mom aside maybe half a year after that because my parents were in really poor health. And my mom had almost died again when I was 30. And so that's what prompted me to return to Edmonton because I had been living here in BC, for most of the 90s. And I remember telling my mom that I thought I had a problem with food and that I thought I needed help. And, you know, just by coincidence, my mom had a previous doctor that had helped her through her cancer journey. In fact, this doctor had diagnosed my mom's cancer, and this doctor was a specialist in eating disorders.
Wow.
So yeah, fortunately, my mother knew exactly who I should be talking to, and I was, you know, introduced into a 12-step program. And that really saved my life, I have to say. Things really started getting a lot better for me in my early 30s. I'd say after about a year into recovery, I finally got it.
So for the listener, and just for me even, I'm when you think of eating disorders, you think of anorexia, bulimia. I haven't often heard of eating disorders partnered with sugar addiction before. I assume that's probably a very common thing. How can you, I guess, define or describe what an eating disorder or what your eating disorder looked like? And also maybe explain what body dysmorphia is as well.
Okay, so my eating disorder looked like sneakiness. I would never eat that pan of brownies in front of you, but alone in my kitchen at night. Yeah. So it was sneakiness, it was lying, it was stealing, it was deceit. I wasn't honest with anyone, least of all myself, for the longest time. I would say that my eating disorder really started in high school, around about the time my mom got sick. I started sneaking food, especially sugary food, because it gave me a temporary high. But okay, so throughout my 20s, eating disorder looked like waking up, not having much for breakfast, going to work, because I was teaching at this time too, going to work, having like a coffee and a muffin at work, kind of skipping lunch, going to the gym after work to work out hard with very little good fuel in my body, and then coming home and eating late at night more carbs and sugar and things that were not feeding my body nourishment, you know, not giving my body nourishment. And that was a crazy cycle. And then, you know, when you eat late at night, I mean, it's true now that I'm older too, I can't do that because I feel like garbage the next morning.
You almost feel hungover.
Honestly. It's
like a food hangover.
It's a parallel to a hangover. Yeah. But that was my existence. And throughout my 20s, I would have this cycle, this really painful, shameful cycle of eating poorly, depriving my body of good food, and just seeking that next sugar hit. You know, like I used to joke, and it wasn't really a lie at all. I couldn't drive past a McDonald's or a 7-Eleven without stopping to get some kind of sugar fix. So it was just painful. My eating disorder was very painful and extremely shameful. And
sorry to interrupt. Did you feel like you were always on this quest to lose weight and be smaller?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's where the body dysmorphia comes in. When I finally met that doctor that I told you about, she had a hard time identifying the exact type, like naming my eating disorder. And she eventually called it exercise bulimia. I didn't love going to the gym. I lived at the gym every night. You know, I would work out really hard. I mean, spinning was my church every Sunday. that I would go to 2-hour spin classes, and I thought that was normal. I would just, and in the process, what I did was I really, really ruined my knees, because at age 31, I needed bilateral knee surgery.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I had really, and because my weight fluctuated so much and I did so much running and so much, pounding on the pavement, my knees were screaming. And they're still terrible. Like, I ruined my health with my eating disorder. And I want to mention too that this doctor that I found in Edmonton, she used to describe eating disorders as like a coin. There I go again. Sorry, crap. This doctor who helped me through my eating disorder, she used to describe eating disorders like a coin. Like, if you have a loonie, for us here in Canada, a $1 coin, one side is anorexia, and we all know what that is. It's, like consuming too little, not eating enough, quest to be thin, right? The other side is compulsive overeating, when somebody's eating great amounts of food and they can't stop, just to numb the pain, right? Just to dampen the pain. And the edge of that coin could be bulimia, right? So you're doing a bit of both in bulimia, right? You want to get rid of the calories and not, wear all the calories you're consuming. But that's an interesting way to think about an eating disorder. And so as an exercise bulimic, I would eat a lot of sugar in my case. And sometimes it wasn't sugar. Sometimes it would just be something delicious, and I wouldn't be able to stop.
Yeah.
Because I found that, the dopamine hits, it stopped working. That method of medicating myself stopped working eventually. And that's when I asked my mom to help me to get help. And this doctor was just so kind and so brilliant. And she said, I'll never forget, she said, Patrece, you're not a bad person. You're a sick person. We need to get you some help. Interestingly, she never, the thing, adoption, she had obviously a psychological background too. And she had written a book about her own eating disorder, but never once did anyone question me about being adopted.
Which is so common.
So common.
Yeah. And it's like, now you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, it's so obvious, right? So obvious. Right. So how are you doing today with it all?
Yeah.
How did you get well?
Well, I went to a lot of 12-step meetings, like hundreds and hundreds of 12-step meetings.
What does that look like because I know what 12-step meetings look like for drugs and alcohol, even codependency, but what does that look like for eating?
I think it's very similar. I think that addiction can manifest in so many different ways, right? And for example, people who are in recovery from alcohol addiction, say 12-step addiction, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, they use something called the Big Book, right? And I've read the Big Book a few times, because it applies, even though it was, written many, many years ago, 70 years ago or something, even though it was written so long ago, the way that, the authors described the feeling, that dis-ease that I've spoken about, it's the same, no matter what substance or behavior you use, that feeling that I need something else, I need to get away from, it's avoiding looking at yourself.
Yeah.
It's just avoiding being with yourself and sitting with those uncomfortable feelings. So,
So for someone that, wants to change, wants to stop this crazy cycle, right, what can you say is the first step that you would maybe suggest they take?
Yeah. Ask for help.
Ask for help.
Know that you're not alone. Shame prevents us from reaching out for help.
Yeah.
It certainly did in my case for the longest time. And when I finally had the courage to say, I have a problem, I need to be with other people who share my problem, I need to talk to those people, find out what they're doing to get healthy, and really that's what I did. And I did have some private therapy as well, which certainly helped. But just getting rid of the shame was huge for me, not isolating myself, because my disease flourishes in isolation. And when I am in community with others who share my affliction, then that's when I start to thrive, you know. And today, it's funny, you know, I just want to say my second husband, the toughest conversation, I was so scared to tell him, but 2 weeks into our dating, I told him that I had an eating disorder. And it was really important for me to be honest, because I was never honest with my first husband. And I thought, well, let's try the honesty path and see if it gets us any further. And he was just lovely. He was just so understanding and so sweet about it all. And he said, what can I do to support you, you know? So I would just say today, what my addiction looks like is that I still have to, I don't know, some people think that they can get over an addiction, and I respect that. I don't reach out for sugar anymore. It just hasn't been part of my life for over 20 years. And I'm so grateful for that. I feel like I've had a bit of a miracle. But I can't go back there. I've done the field research, and it's still something that stays with me. And just like most alcoholics will say, I can't drink in moderation. That's my experience with certain foods. I just cannot eat them in moderation, so I don't go there. I find that, I don't know if this is your experience at all, but moving my body, getting outside and taking a good walk, moving my body by doing yoga is my therapy. That's my medicine. Finding silence, sitting in silence and meditating for a little bit in the morning and in the evening before I go to bed. It's medicine for me. I don't do well with lots of loud noises and in big crowds. I prefer to be able to have access to quiet, peaceful spaces all the time. And because for the longest time I had no sense of inner peace when I had so much anxiety, you know, I cherish my peace. I guard my peace. It's just it's a treasure to me. Yeah. I just have to really always have access to peace, and it's always inside.
Yeah, I relate to that. I do. My husband is like loud and obnoxious sometimes. Sorry, Stu, love you. But he likes, you know, playing the music loud in the car and having the windows down and tapping his hand on stuff. And, you know, and he comes in and he's just like this big ball of energy. And as much as I appreciate that in him, there are times where I'm just like, I need peace. Like right now, and I feel the older I get, the more I recognize how much I long for peace and solace, you know, and I do cherish it. Yeah. So I want to talk more about your book, and I guess I just want to ask you what inspired you to write your book, and if there's anything else you wanted to say before we get to that part, then you can go ahead, but I wanted to know what inspired you to write.
Thank you for asking. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's funny, Crystal, because in my career as an English teacher for 20 years, I taught people how to write, you know, and I was always helping other people tell their stories. And when my mom finally passed away in 2009, so she survived over 20 years after having that initial cancer diagnosis, her cancer came back. And I was a caregiver for her before she died. And I've lost my train of thought. Okay, just a second here. What was your question again? My book. Okay, yeah. So I was a caregiver for my mom before she died, and then 5 years after after when my mom was on her deathbed, it was really sweet. It's a sweet memory now. I remember talking to her. It was like one of the last days she could still talk. And she looked at me with her pretty blue eyes and she said, "Who will finish the history book that I started for the women at church?" And I went, "I will." Like mammoth project, right? It was a huge, huge project. And she was maybe a quarter into it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So like all these women in her like ladies organization at church were to submit biographies. They were going to get like this hardcover book published for the organization's 50th anniversary. And, you know, my mom had thought about maybe getting a publisher. Like she wasn't too far into it when she got sick and she could just no longer continue. And so I thought, well, I don't know if I have the skills to do this, but I promised her I'd finish the book. So 2 years later, I had 500 copies of a hardcover book, and I was at a book launch, and like Alberta's premier came to the book launch. Like, it was crazy. I had to get like this grant. Like I had never written for a grant in my life. I secured a huge grant, and we got the book done. And like my mother's history book committee became my committee. So I got this crash course in how to publish a book.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had to do it because I promised my mom on her deathbed that I would do it. Yeah. And I mean, it was not easy. That was like one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But I kept my promise, and it turned out okay. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but I'm so proud of myself for finishing it.
Absolutely. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. So I knew a little bit about publishing going into this. And then actually my dad, my sweet dad, passed away 5 years after my mom, almost, like within a month almost. And so I did some caregiving for him too. And then in 2019, my biological father, who I met and who I loved very much, he was diagnosed with cancer. So really, that was my third parent who I knew was going to die of something cancer related. And that hit me very hard because like, who says that? My third parent is going to die of cancer. So I knew then that I had to tell my story. I knew I had a story that was worth telling. That was maybe a little bit unique, especially for people who, aren't adoptees.
Yeah.
It's a unique thing. But of course, I've written my book for adoptees, of course, primarily for adoptees, but also for those in recovery from addiction, which I know, sadly, that a lot of adoptees can relate to.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very overrepresented in that arena.
Yes, you're right. And of course, I had to share my caregiving experiences. As a kid, I was very, very afraid of death. And in my work in the funeral home, the funeral homes around Edmonton, I was a celebrant, and I unconsciously needed to heal my fear of death and of being around dead people and of grief. I mean, I had so much grief of my own, and it was very uncomfortable for me to be around grieving people. But after my folks died, after my mom and dad died, I knew that I had to, on some conscious, unconscious level, I'm not sure, but I needed to be in that environment and see what went on there because I didn't want to live with the paralyzing fear anymore. And in fact, when my father died, I was already working in a funeral home, and, I was entrusted with, helping wheel his casket down to the prep room, like things like that. I never could have imagined that I would do such difficult things. Mm-hmm. And recovery has given me the gift of being able to face my fears more than anything. And so my caregiving experience is part of my book. Facing my fears is a huge part of my book. And I just knew I needed to do it. And my process in writing the book, honestly, I don't know, perhaps some adoptees can relate to this too. My attention span isn't the greatest.
I was going to say, do you think you have maybe ADHD?
I wouldn't be surprised. I've never been diagnosed with it, but I knew that school was a huge struggle.
Yeah, me too.
Studying, completing assignments, huge struggle. And even writing my book, I had times like that when I, wouldn't be able to concentrate at home, certainly. So I quickly figured out that if I went to my local library in St. Albert and closed myself in a study room for 2 hours, that I could do work. And that it was like a job, but it was a job I loved.
I love that.
And I loved the process of even just walking there, because the library is a 10-minute walk from our home. Yeah. And I loved the process of just walking over the river and settling into my dusty little room and doing my thing for 2 hours and coming home and feeling like, yay, I've taken a chip off of that. I've done a little bit more to see the end. And so right now, my book is just about nearing the end of its second edit, and it's going to receive a third edit. I'm working with a brilliant editor who I'm really grateful for. Thank you, Katie. And so we're going to get this done. I've applied for a grant to help me see it to completion, but I'm really, really hoping to get it traditionally published within the before the end of the year, just to find a publisher. That would make me so, so happy.
So if there's any publisher that's listening and the book has not been published yet, come find Patrece and publish her book. It needs to be out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope it resonates with a lot of people.
Oh, it will. Like, I had the honor and pleasure of hearing your reunion story with your biological father, Grant is his name. And I mean, just that alone was so moving. You're so eloquent in even your speech. I can't imagine how you write. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it.
I can't wait for you to read it.
Yeah, that's incredible. So what would you say was the most difficult part of writing a book? Writing your story. Maybe not writing a book, because you did that before, but writing your story.
Well, it's just so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think I really had to get over. I'm still getting over the fear of judgment, because I've told close friends my story. My husband knows all about my story. My close family members know about my story, but they don't know everything. Mm-hmm. And if strangers judge me, I don't care about that. So I guess fear of judgment is a big one. That was probably the hardest thing. It's all psychological. I mean, the only person whose approval I need to do this is myself. I really, really get that now. But I've never stopped being a member of my recovery community. Nowadays, I am in a recovery/yoga community, and I lead a meeting in that community every week, and it's medicine for my soul, and it keeps me accountable. It keeps me honest. It keeps me on the straight and narrow, really, because, as I said, being in community keeps me well. Being in isolation and hiding from my shadow makes me really sick.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you go to create something, and I think something especially as intimate as sharing your own personal story, it's so much, like, I know this sounds so cliche, but it really is about the journey. It's not even about the finished product. Like, now that I have my doc out there, it's like, okay, yeah, I did it. It's this cool thing that I did. I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for everybody along the way that was involved in making it happen, and the places that it's brought me to, and the people that it's allowed me to meet, and all of that. And I mean, when someone comes to me and says your film impacted me, I mean, there's nothing like that either, to know that you did something that was meaningful to somebody else. I try not to stay too attached to that, to be honest with you. I always say that, regardless whether my art makes someone love me or hate me, or they love it or they hate it, it doesn't really matter. The whole point is that you feel something. And, but the journey really is like, I can picture you in the snow in the winter in St. Albert walking.
Sometimes I got a ride when it was -30,
but that whole, like, every single day in, day out, and the revelations that you must have had, it really is, there's something so profound about creating something that is so intimate as sharing your story. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And it is the journey, right? The journey was healing for me. The journey of writing a book was healing for me, just as the journey of, making your beautiful documentary. Like, when you get praise, you deserve the praise. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. And I've seen it twice. And for some reason, the second time I saw your film, I cried like a baby through most of it. It was just, but beautiful. Yeah. But no, it was a really healing process for me to write a book. Best therapy I've ever had.
Yeah.
Because it forces you to go down memory lane and to think of all these things that you had dismissed as trivial before. So I really had to revisit some hard memories, and I did a lot of crying in my little room. But even if it never gets to publication, I have to be really happy, because it has changed me to write a book about my experience as an adoptee.
How has it changed you?
It's helped me. It's given me more peace, which is why I've named the book as I have, A Surprising Peace. It has helped me to be more gentle and more compassionate with myself. It has helped me to realize that I can do hard things. and that it's okay to make mistakes, and that it's okay to learn from those mistakes and just to own them, It's taught me so much. I could go on and on, but yeah, the book writing has changed me.
Do you feel like you know yourself in a new way?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I would say so. I think the self-compassion piece is big. I just have more tools, more strategies for finding that peace, because inevitably, as you know, the anxiety does surface still from time to time. Yeah. It'll manifest in a poor night's sleep if my mind is busy, or in just, butterflies in my stomach, whatever. But to have more tools to go back to that place of peace and to have my feet on solid ground, you can't buy that in stores,
Isn't
that's
true?
Priceless.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, Patrece, I am just so grateful for you and your story, and thank you for sharing so much with us today. Thank you for sharing your journey with the eating disorder. I really do think that that's valuable to our listeners. It's valuable to me, as that's been a bit of my journey as well, to healing. And I just wish you well, and I cannot wait for your book to come out. I cannot wait to read it. And for those of you listening, keep your eyes open for a surprising piece by Patrece. How do you say your last name?
Maljuzinski.
Maljuzinski.
Thank you so much for having me today, Crystal. This has been an incredible honor, and I'm just so delighted to sit down and chat with a nice friend.
Oh, me too. Thank you, Patrece. Thank you. I was going to say have a nice day.
Will do.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube. And have yourself a wonderful day.